Welcome to OSS, that is Open Source Software Insights, episode 1. When I say episode 1, there are going to be another episodes as well in relation to the open source. The evolution of open source software. I'm Dr. Padmavati Roy, your host. In this episode, we will explore the fascinating world of open source software, bringing you the latest news, in-depth discussions, and interviews with industry experts. In today's episode, we will explore the history and key concepts of open source software. From its humble beginning to its pivotal role in today's tech landscape, we will uncover what makes open source such a driving force for innovation and collaboration. But before we get started, let us take a moment to understand what open source software really is. Essentially, OSS or open source software is a software with source code that anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance. It is built on principles of transparency, collaboration, and community driven development. We will cover the origins of free software movement led by visionaries like Richard Stallman and the evolution of open source as a mainstream concept. We will also touch on key concepts such as licensing, community collaboration, and the governance models, maybe in future episodes, that keep these projects thriving. So, whether you are a seasoned developer, an aspiring contributor, or just curious about the software that powers much of our digital world, this episode has something for you. Stay tuned as we unravel the rich tapestry of open source software. All right, let us get into it. To truly appreciate the impact of OSS, let me invite my guest, Julius Schwartzenberg, a software engineer and expert in OSS. Julius, welcome to the episode. Can you please let me know what is the history of the open source software, how it all started? Before that, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Padma. It's great to be here. Um, I'm Julius Schwartzenberg. I'm working as a software developer at Luxoft, and I have about 25 years of experience now using various open source software, free software, as my main tools for productivity on my for my computing.
Excellent, Julius. Yeah, please go ahead.
So you asked about the history.
Yes.
So if you look back in time, in the early days of computing, the resources to perform computing on were scarce. So people's focus was very much on getting computing time, getting the computer to do what they wanted it to do in that scarce computing time, and cooperating was a big part of that. So there's actually a book which is called Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution, by Stephen Levy. I found it really interesting to read because it really gives you a sense of the atmosphere that was around it in those days. People would be writing programs, and when they were done, they would just leave them around the computers they were using. So the programs were on paper tapes, for instance.
Mhm.
People would just leave them around, and others would then find them, use them, improve them, and so on.
So basically, it was openly and freely shared among users in earlier days.
Exactly. Yes. There was no idea of hiding something like source code.
Yeah. So then, how did the shift begin to proprietary software?
So that's yeah, that's I would say as computers became more popular and smaller,
Mm,
uh, businesses saw this interest in that if they have developed a program, they don't want people to copy it outside of their control,
mm,
and they also don't like this idea of people modifying it outside of their control. So at some point, companies started asking users to not make duplicates of software, but of course, in practice, that was still happening.
mhm.
Uh, but yeah, generally there a certain tension was created between yeah the traditional hacker community and companies that were developing software yeah in a proprietary sense, or they wanted to distribute it as proprietary.
Okay, that's very interesting, right? So, when the free software movement has started, or can you talk a little bit about Richard Stallman and the GNU project?
Of course. So uh, there was a pivotal moment. So Richard Stallman, he was one of these original hackers that was working along other hackers. So this was mainly happening in universities, laboratories, uh, and uh, so he still felt this hacker culture. And at one point, he was confronted with a situation
Mm-hmm.
where he required a piece of source code because uh, the printer that had been donated to the university, it had paper jams from time to time. So similar to
Mm-hmm.
the previous printer, uh, Stallman had modified the software of the printer so that the printer could notify everybody who had queued a print job when there would be a paper jam, so somebody could then take a look. So they had this new printer, and he wanted to make the same modification to the software. So at some point, he reached out to one of the developers of this software, and that person told him, "I'm sorry, I signed this non-disclosure agreement, so I cannot provide you the source code you're asking for." And
Mm-hmm.
for him, that was a very yeah, he had a very strong emotional reaction to that. So it's maybe you recognize this situation where you suddenly where you have a problem, but you are really it's really beyond your own control, and this can be very frustrating. So yeah, for him, he realized that the world is moving in a direction where people are losing control over their own equipment, and somebody else is more or less able to yeah hold people hostage because they have more control over the equipment that they already sold. So then he came up with the idea to start a project. And at the time, there was a very popular operating system called Unix, and Unix also had quite a lot of complexities around its licensing. So he said, "Okay, I'm going to develop a clone of Unix,"
Mm-hmm.
and he called it GNU, which stands for GNU is not Unix.
Oh.
And this would be a fully free system, so that anybody could always get a copy, modify it, and so on. So there would be no restrictions. Um, but then he needed to come up with a good license.
Mm-hmm.
So what he did, he of course licensing uses the copyright. So licensing happens according to copyright law. So he managed to come up with a license that ensures that people will always have certain freedoms using copyright law.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's so. In one word, we can say Richard Stallman was the father of the free software movement as well.
yes, he started this. He coined also the four freedoms. So
Oh.
if you take a piece of software,
Mm-hmm.
then there is this definition: is this program free or not? And then free is based on the concept of having particular freedoms. So freedom 0, the freedom to use it for any purpose. Freedom
Mm-hmm.
1, to study how the program works and change it to make it do what you wish. Freedom 2, the freedom to redistribute and make copies so you can help your neighbor. And freedom
Mm-hmm.
3, the freedom to improve the program and release your improvements to the public so that the whole community can benefit.
Okay, that
Uh,
those are the four freedoms.
and important here is that so there's nothing about cost. And actually you have freedom 0, the freedom to use it for any purpose. So this means that also from a commercial point of view, this is very attractive because you can always build solutions on top of this, and you're not
Mm.
restricted in what you can do with these solutions. And the only thing is, what he embedded in the license is that you cannot keep those freedoms only to yourself. You have to pass them on to any recipient to whom you will redistribute the program. And this concept is called copyleft.
Mm-hmm. So there is also um, some funny way of coining the copyleft. Why, how all of that started? Why there
Yes.
is a there is some kind of amusement around copyleft.
So the term copyleft obviously is a pun on the word copyright. So
Yeah.
we have copyright law, and licensing always the reason we have these licenses is because of copyright law and software being copyrightable. So if somebody owns the copyright, they need to give you a license so that you can do certain things with it. And for instance, a license, you would need a license to use it, or you need a license to redistribute it.
Mhm.
And the GPL, the GNU General Public License, it provides you those. It provides you the ability to use it for any purpose, the ability to modify it, redistribute it, and so on. But only on the condition that you make sure that the recipient continues to enjoy those freedoms that you got initially as well. And this copyleft idea is kind of copyleft versus copyright, but in the end, it's now a very famous term for these types of software licenses.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So from free software movement to the open source, how it all happened? Can you share a little bit more details about the term open source and also open source, how it has emerged and all?
So at some point when this kind of software became more popular, uh, there were some companies that were getting a bit scared, even because they were selling a lot of proprietary or a lot of licenses for their proprietary software. And there was even a CEO who used terminology from diseases to talk about this. So he talked about cancerous and viral licensing, which is a
Mm-hmm.
little bit crazy, but people at some point felt that it would be yeah, a good idea to come up with something that would be more attractive to these traditional types of businesses. So at some point, the term open source was coined, and uh, some big projects were released with the name open source, and one of them was Netscape, so the web browser that was popular in the 90s. Uh, the source code was released, and the Mozilla project was born.
Mm-hmm.
And this, at some point, uh, yeah, gave a huge boost in the sense that open source was not so much positioned to ensure that people had this kind of freedom, or to ensure that people had control over their computing. Open source was more positioned as bringing different people, different companies, different entities together to collaboratively build software.
So it's also propagating the collaborations across the world as well. So it's truly fascinating to uncover the origins of open source. And I'm really sure about our audience appreciate your detailed insights into this, Julius. And let us now focus on some of the key concepts in open source software, such as source code, licensing, various types of licenses, so on and so forth. Over to you, Julius.
So I think the main types of licenses that people distinguish are copyleft and permissive when it comes to free software licensing. So as I mentioned, copyleft licenses focus on ensuring that every end recipient, every end user of a piece of software uh, can exercise those four freedoms. But there's also permissively licensed software, which initially, if you would receive something under a permissive license, you will also gain those four freedoms. But there's also an opportunity to incorporate this work into a proprietary solution. Some cases, for instance, network stack, or maybe
Mhm.
a decoder for an image format that would become popular, where people cared a lot about that the format would be adopted, or that there would be a good network stack that was robust, that would be adopted, to avoid that people would have to write their own, which would be less robust, or to avoid that maybe a particular format would not get adopted at all, even by proprietary software companies. So in some cases, people said, okay, let's license this under a permissive license, because we care about, yeah, at that point, about something different. So this is an important reason for permissively licensed software. But of course, there are also other companies that, yeah, they are not sure about releasing their software under free license to their end users. So they also incorporate permissively licensed components. But yeah, these are the main characteristics when it comes to copyright law. In some cases, you also see that some licenses provide, for instance, also a patent license. So if the code would be covered by patents, then you would get a patent license along with it. And these kinds of aspects relate to the developments that you're currently seeing in free software licensing and open source software licensing.
That's very insightful, Julius. So can you also touch upon how the open source software influence the community and collaboration?
So there are different kinds of communities, and it's very important that if you want to participate in a community, you manage to understand its way of working. You manage to understand its the way people interact. So originally, a lot of communication took place using a system called IRC,
Mm-hmm.
Internet Relay Chat. It's a very old protocol, but still used a lot today. And people would or people gather in the chat rooms and they discuss well the project that they're working on, and they discuss ways of working, things related to improving it, and so on. And another aspect is mailing lists. So a lot of groups communicate using mailing lists. Uh, and what you observe is that yeah, if you want to participate in this development, it's important to adhere to these conventions that people are used to, because otherwise it can be tough for the people that are already there to really make use of what you're trying to introduce. But what is also a trend now is that projects where in the past maybe it would be people who were building something because they were curious, uh, they they are changing more into projects where companies are working together. So
Mm-hmm.
if you take, for instance, the kernel Linux, the majority of the development is done by various companies who use this kernel in all sorts of products.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And now we are into this agile world, and virtually people are working across the world, and also these agile models and community development plays a major role in the virtual world. So, Julius, what advice do you give anyone who wants to contribute to the OSS?
Um, I would say usually it starts the other way around. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe you have a problem that you want to solve, or maybe you're
Mm-hmm.
actually a user of some open source software and you want to change how it works. So then the first step would be to get involved with that community. So as I mentioned, maybe they're on IRC, so then you would need to join their IRC channel and start
Mm-hmm.
chatting with people. But maybe so nowadays you see projects are also using services like GitHub, GitLab, with discussion, which have discussions as part of their project pages. So you would need to reach out to the right spot and find people, and maybe you can even just download the source code and try to modify it, try to play with it, and then see what happens if you try to submit a contribution.
Okay. Yeah. And in an organization, how important is to have an open source review board? And how do you think open source review board should operate in an organization?
It depends a lot on the type of organization. So if you have a small organization and you have a close relationship with your customers, then I would say the focus should be on uh, making sure that your customers are well aware of, for instance, the four freedoms. And
Mm-hmm.
from a business perspective, if you as a company can say, look, our solution is built on top of this free software, and when you do business with us, we are going to guarantee that you will get the 4 freedoms. That means that yeah, you of course you create a lot of trust, because that other company will know, okay, I'm not going to be stuck. I can always exercise those 4 freedoms, and even go to your competitor if there's a problem, or they could hire their own programmer. So in that case, uh, if you manage to work like that as a business, then this also brings you the advantage that there's a lot of software out there under various licenses, and generally you can just build on top of all of that. You can use copyleft licensed software, and even software that might have licensing that those your customers, if they would provide access to their customers, that again they would need to pass on the freedoms. At some point, you have a lot of software available to build your solution on top of. So this would reduce the need for an explicit review board.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a situation where you're dealing with proprietary source code, so there are things that for some reason you need to keep secret. Maybe it's because it's not your own code. Maybe it's provided by some other company and they don't want you to reveal those secrets. Or maybe there are US export controls covering certain aspects of that code, and you're not allowed to provide it in source form, but you can provide it in binary form. Uh, then there will be situations where you need to be uh, careful and make sure that if you would, for instance, combine something that needs to stay secret with something that has a copyleft license, then
Mm-hmm.
you may need to reveal your secret. And yeah, that is something you need to consider. If that's yeah, what is the best way forward? Is it revealing your secret and being able to build on top of all this copyleft licensed software, or whether you feel it's more attractive to keep something secret?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very enlightening. And are there, do you recommend anything for the from the open source perspective for the beginners? How do they get started?
Yeah, it depends similar to earlier. It depends on how you want to get started. So if, for instance, you are frustrated with lack of control over a proprietary piece of software, then it's a good idea to look for a replacement for that particular piece of software. Uh, Generally, there are also projects, if you want to start as a contributor, there are also projects that put a lot of effort into helping out first-time contributors to, so they generally, if you send in a contribution, you should be aware it will not be accepted just straight away. That's very
Mm-hmm.
rare. So what usually happens is that somebody will take a look and say, if you make these and these changes, that would be really great. And then you make these changes and you submit it again. And then there will be more of such questions. People will keep asking you to make certain changes, or they will come up with certain design ideas. And especially if they are given the time for that by their boss, because usually people working on these projects, they are also working at companies. Uh, so in this sense, it can be very helpful mechanism to learn programming as well. And one project that I sent some patches to a long time ago when I was still in university is the wine project. And
Mm-hmm.
there also the developers were very keen on not even telling you how to solve things, but they were just giving you hints. So they were
Mm-hmm.
uh, kind of encouraging you to try to figure out yourself what to do. And I think this is a very noble way of handling this.
Yeah.
And there are more projects where people are involved in such way. So
So
I would recommend
basically,
looking for those.
yeah, looking for those and also start as a contributor,
Exactly,
then to navigate into the various things.
and understand the contribution process.
Yeah,
So it's not a one-off. You really, yeah, and it can be some intense communication. Of course, very important is also that you enjoy all these things, that you enjoy
absolutely. Yeah.
this process of with this communication, learning from people and so on.
Community as well. So, how do you think a learner learn more about the open source? Are there any free trainings or any? Can you share any resources that we can share for our listeners in the respective podcast platforms?
So I think the main resource would be the website of the Free Software Foundation. So
Mm-hmm,
that's at fsf.org. And the Free Software Foundation was actually founded by Richard Stallman
mm-hmm.
as a foundation to support the GNU project, which is at gnu.org. And
Okay.
yeah, on that website, on those websites, you can find a lot of information on licensing and uh, another interesting organization that might be interesting if you are looking at consumer products is the
Mm-hmm,
Software Freedom Conservancy. They are really trying, well, similarly to the Free Software Foundation, but they are actually yeah, reaching out to companies who are selling products that include free software
mm-hmm.
to make sure that they adhere to the licenses and so that the end users of those products gain more control over those products.
That's wonderful, Julius, for sharing your knowledge with our audience today. I would like to have you as my esteemed guest on another episode on the recent news in open source software and what is the role of AI in the open source software, maybe in next month or so.
Yeah, it would be my pleasure, Padma. I'm looking forward.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for being my guest on today's episode on open source software. You have shared a lot of useful information and also for the beginners, how they can get more knowledge and expertise. And I am going to share all the resources which you mentioned. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Open Source Insights. We have journeyed through the rich history of open source software, explored few key concepts, and we hope today's discussion enlightened you and sparked your interest in exploring and contributing to the open source projects. Whether you are a seasoned developer or just starting out, there is a place for you in the open source community. Before we go, we'd like to thank our listeners for tuning in, and my heartfelt thanks to Julius for being my guest and also sharing a lot of information. And your support and feedback means the world to us. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with others interested. If you have any questions, comments, or topics you would like us to cover in future episodes, please contact us on social media. We love hearing from our listeners and are always looking to improve this podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode, in which we'll explore the exciting world of open source and artificial intelligence and how these two dynamic fields are converging to shape the future. Thank you once again for joining us. Until next time, keep coding, collaborating, and keeping the open source spirit alive. Thanks a lot, Julius.
Thank you so much, Padma. It was a pleasure to be here.